Right, I'm advertising my new book here, which is just in its short life has become essential reading for anyone dealing with evaluation. There's just a few cards here with the telephone number printed wrongly, but that's normal. Could I just ask, I mean, I know it's a sort of humiliating primary school exercise, but could I ask you to put your hands up just quickly? I'm assuming, first of all, that you have roughly an idea, which may bounce around randomly in your mind, about what evaluation is. About if I said program evaluation, just nodding, more or less, yeah, okay. Okay, so our efforts over the last 50 years are not entirely in vain. And I'm assuming that a lot of you here are in some sort of official, semi-official capacity, commissioning evaluations, using evaluations, nodding, yeah, right, okay. And there may be a smaller number of people here who actually do evaluations. And there's a few nods there as well, I'm assuming. Okay. All right. Okay, well, forget everything you know for the time being, okay? Because Lord David Sainsbury, who spent many years as science minister, and whose charitable foundations, plural, have spent many, many years using programme evaluation to guide their decision making, thinks that evaluation is a new kid on the block, if you read my blurb. Now, that's kind of worrying on the one hand, because it's his millions of pounds that are being guided supposedly by programme evaluation and he's not aware of it. But it's also quite cheering, really, because my view, as I suggested in my blurb, and which I'll talk about, is that evaluation, you know, as was originally conceived, and I suppose I was sort of one of the early conceivers, maybe second generation early conceivers. Evaluation as it was conceived really is not. It's a much more expansive practice and idea than we're familiar with today. It's become rather narrow. I wrote quite provocatively somewhere, I don't know whether it's on the blurb, probably not, but I wrote somewhere that evaluation, program evaluation, insofar as it's a practice, most people exercise it as a practice. It's something you do, and you do it because you're required to do it, because you feel that you need it to be done. But you generally don't do evaluation because you've read the theory and you're interested in adding to the theory, you know, or you're interested in seeing if the theory works, or whether it's in the academic framework. But nonetheless, what evaluation has become as a theory and as a practice, because there are people who theorise about it, is somewhat diminished from what it was, and unusually among disciplines. If you think of nursing, teaching, disciplines that have a relationship with theoretical and methodological development, they generally advance by accumulating ideas and developing ideas and what have you. And you know, so talks like this will be part of the conversation that's slowly moving the field forward. But evaluation seems to have advanced by shedding ideas. You know, in the early conception of evaluation, we tried to define the use of evaluation, its usefulness, its practical usefulness, in terms of its capacity to address complex problems and issues, and to, without providing any immediate and cast-iron solutions, to reduce the doubts that are around, you know, to make us feel more confident at dealing with uncertainty. And so we raised, quite confidently, a range of very problematic issues to do with the politics of evaluation, to do with its methods, to do with relationships, to do with its epistemology, if you get your head around that word, you know, what knowledge is and how it's made, who believes it, you know. And we were quite confident in saying that this is a very uncertain field of action. There's no way you can take something as complex as a programme, a nurse training programme, an urban development programme, an environmental adaptation program, whatever. There's no way you can take a complex program with many people in it, with different backgrounds, ideas, etc., and all the politics of it and stuff, and say what it is, even, without even saying whether it's good or bad, or whether it succeeds or fails. I mean, these are part of what was called the Great Simplification, But over the years, we seem to have become quite comfortable with the Great Simplification and less comfortable with dealing with uncertainty and vagaries and sort of amoebic boundaries and all that sort of business, which is what really evaluation started with. So I go through this in a practical sense in this book, and I do recommend the book to you because it's the only book I know of, and which is why I wrote it. I mean, it's taken me 15 years to write this. It's the only book I know of that says, well, look, here's the theory, which has a very practical, and here are the practical implications. This is how you work. If you're thinking not of applying a model unthinkingly, but if you're thinking methodologically, if you're actually prepared to confront a world of uncertainty in which your judgment, either as commissioner or as evaluator, your judgment carries a lot more weight than any algorithm or any single recommendation or whatever. That in the end, whatever you do with evaluation, it forces you back on judgment. And that's what it says, and that's a world of deep uncertainty and complexity that people like to talk about and what have you. But that's fine, because you don't have to resolve it. You don't need to resolve complexity. You don't need to resolve uncertainties and unsurenesses and what have you. So what I'll do, I've got 3 slides, which I'm told is relatively few, refreshingly few, but it's too many for me. I normally work with 1, if any, because there's far too much complexity involved in slides. But I'll just run you through the slides in about 2 minutes, or 3 minutes or so, and then I want to just focus on just a couple of them. So here we go. No bells and whistles, we expect too much. When we expect the evaluators to know what a program is, and to see the program as a functional entity. Ernest House, one of the early, more solid founders of the discipline, as it were, he did meta-evaluations of a number of evaluations in the United States, and those meta-evaluations were drawn on to feed a lot of understanding about what program evaluations can be. And he did a meta-evaluation of the Push Excel program, which had been deemed a failure by the evaluators, not unusually. And he looked into it in some detail and said, well, but this was evaluated as a program, and it simply isn't a program. Push Excel, it doesn't matter what it is, but Push Excel is a movement. It's more like a movement, which has sort of shifting senses driven by values rather than objectives. It has expressions of value in the way people act rather than performances. It can't be controlled by indicators, it can only be controlled through persuasions and conversations or whatever it is. So to evaluate it, assuming it's a program is simply an error. And it's neither fair on Push Excel, nor is it fair on anyone else who needs to learn upon Push Excel. So we do expect evaluators to know what a program is before we even look at it. And most of what I'm going to say is derives from this particular one. If we don't understand what programs are, then there's no way we can conduct or commission an evaluation. We expect the evaluator to have within her reach a depiction of the program. So we get a program underway, and we send an evaluator out to describe it, actually. And we want the description to fall broadly within the parameters of what we commissioned originally, when we set up the program. Well, of course, programs aren't that, ever. Of the 30 or so programs I've ever evaluated, there's not one that looks remotely like its initial objectives. They don't. But we do expect evaluators to ignore their experience and come back with a depiction of a program that broadly reaches our expectations. Well, why? And we sometimes, well often I think, expect the evaluators to rule on options and make recommendations where actually it's the paid responsibility of others. So given the paradox that a government department, let's say, or official agency will mount a programme and then commission its evaluation, well, where's the independence in that? But let's assume that that paradox makes sense in the world. Well, it's the agency's responsibility to make judgments and decisions. It's not the evaluators. And the evaluator pays a fleeting visit and then disappears, and doesn't live with the consequences of any recommendation they might make, So it's simply unreasonable. We're asking far too much to ask an evaluator to know enough about the programmes that we create in order to make a recommendation that has any purchase on the complex reality on the ground. But we do this. I don't think you need to make note. I think this PowerPoint's available.
Yes.
Is it? I do make notes. I mean, quote me at will. So, but also we ask too little, far too little, in the sense that you take evaluators. Colin has done a lot of evaluation work in the international and international development field. Well, who commissions Colin to do what you might think of as, well, to accumulate his wisdom across these programs, to break down the idea that a program on literacy in a school and a program on environmental adaptation and another program on maternal health in Malawi, to assume that these are different, and there's nothing that one can learn from the others, is simply a waste of effort. And plus, it means that we end up commissioning far too many evaluations. Of course, a maternal health program in Malawi can learn from a reading program in a primary school. Of course they can. And more programs are constructed around power structures, have sociologies, have competing resource demands, have, etc., etc., have cultures, But we never ask evaluators to do this, to draw off their experience, saying, all right, forget the particularities, what can we generalise from your wisdom? And broadly, we've lost a lot, or not saved much of that wisdom across the evaluation community. So we simply ask too much of the evaluation, too little of the evaluation community. And we don't often enough expect the evaluator to reveal the political dynamics of programmes. That's just too difficult. Because the evaluator will come back and say, this is complex, whereas what commissioners tend to want is, this is actually looks complex, but it's rather simple, and all you need to do is this, and this. But that's no help. I mean, it's sort of a help on a Tuesday morning, where you've got to write your accountability report, but it doesn't help in the longer term to improve the quality of programs. And this largely, the avoidance of the political dynamics of programs it is largely the result of the internalisation of evaluation in the administrative system, because administrators don't need to know about politics. The job of an administrator in government is to reduce the politics down to technical options. That's essentially the job, and so the whole point is how you diminish, resolve, ignore, avoid politics, because they're not going to be helpful. And this has contaminated evaluation to the point where evaluators simply miss the real texture and not just the texture of a program, but the learning that we can get by expanding on, exploring the political dimensions of programs. It's important, the political competitions within programs for control, for resources, for meaning or whatever, reflect what we know about society. And the more we learn about a program, the more we can learn about society. In the same way, I won't go into this one, we don't expect the evaluators to apprehend the struggle for meaning. Meanings are multiple and multiply and multiplying. So you ask a program director about the program, and the program director will reply, program, yada, 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 program. And you ask a program worker, a researcher, about the program, and they'll go program, next job, program. And then you ask the teacher in the school, and they go, program? I remember there's this bloke who comes around on a Thursday morning, and more besides. And finally, if Grenfell, it hasn't changed the world, it should, but I suspect it will, and I suspect it is, because we now see through Grenfell that all social programs, and this is without exception, are people and are temporary resolutions of what counts as public value. The overall aim of all social programs, whatever program you're involved in, is to try and resolve the question of what counts as of public value, what is worth investing in, how, for how long, where, when, etc., etc. And all programs are hypotheses. All programs are to say, well, maybe this is one way of doing it. And Grenfell clearly demonstrates precisely that, as well as revealing all the politics. I mean, the news yesterday with Sajid David, inexplicably, with no understanding, no guidance from evaluators, no understanding of the politics, says, no, the ministry can't fund recladding of these buildings, that's down to the local authorities, or it's not essential, it's, or whatever. But the whole language of the exchange with the government over there demonstrates the difficulties we have in constructing a proper idea of what counts as of public value. And all programs do this. Grenfell is a primary example of this. All programs cite for multiple and shifting values and interests of the continuing competition among them. Well, Grenfell again, the head of the inquiry, just the fact that he has Sir ahead of his name, or that he talks with a rather plummy accent, or that he's a specialist in commercial law and not in people, not in any way to decry him, to say that, the distinction between him and is a distinction of values. He comes out of a different universe of values, is the claim. All programs call for the evaluators to be responsive and developmental, and not to rest on predetermined criteria of judgment. So I have here, I was looking at it, a spec someone sent me from the Ministry of Defence. Now the Ministry of Defence, normally when I respond to RFPs, I get the questions I'm supposed to ask, the methodology I'm supposed to use, the results framework that needs to be filled out, almost everything but the answer. But the answer's, but the Ministry of Defence doesn't do that. The Ministry of Defence spends a lot of time giving the specification. We want an aircraft, whatever that means, that can do A, B and C under these conditions. But we don't care what it is. You tell us. And it relies on the creativity of the person responding to the RFP to come up with possible solutions. But it exposes the Ministry of Defence to creative ideas and to ideas which have not been in their mind at the beginning. Now, this, of course, is counter the culture of our bureaucratic system. So evaluation being responsive rather than stipulative, rather than deriving questions which have been stipulated ahead of time, rather than the evaluation being the stimulus to which the programme is supposed to respond. Why do you do this? Response. Because. So Robert Stake, right back in 1967, talked about responsive evaluation, saying, no, the programme is the stimulus. The evaluator responds by interpreting what it is that the programme is and says and does. In exactly the same way. No one thought when they put that cheap cladding up on Grenfell Tower that they were going to expose the whole basis of social policy and the relationship between national and local government. They thought just putting cladding up on a building, all programme evaluations raise challenging questions about the democracy of information. Who has the right to know? It's simple as that. Now, currently, not many people. So if we were to do a little workshop now, and do a list of people who need to know about the evaluations you do or commission, and then a corresponding list of people who don't need to know, the second list would be much longer than the first, if you were prepared to admit it. So this is the problem, and here is are the pathways to a solution. Does this make sense? Am I talking sense? Right, I'm not dismaying anyone or anything. I mean, this is all positive stuff, you know. Because, you know, the austerity project has just about run its course. We're probably at the end of a cycle. It is sort of a cycle. And the austerity project carries with it a lot more than just cutting budgets. You know, it casts us, not as people with respect, with dignity, with honour, who fail and succeed at the same time, with aspirations and creative impulses or whatever. No, it casts us as stakeholders, clients, contractors, you know, essentially as economic ciphers. Now, we've bought into this for many, many years. This is falling apart because it's not worked. You know, client simply does not work as well as consumer. Look at the Grenfell residents. You know, I mean, they were cast as clients of the builders and of the housing department or whatever. Our clients, you know, we need to but they're not. They're citizens. They have citizen rights. And citizen rights include rights to information and rights to have a say in whatever futures are being designed in these programs. You know. So anyway, I've actually said most of what I really want to say. I don't want to sort of go on too long about it because it's fairly obvious, I think. I just want it to be fairly obvious and challenging, provocative. No, before I do, is there any questions so far about this, or any statement, objections? I'll tell you what. Before I carry on, let's just have a 5-minute break or something, 5-10 minutes, just to talk. If you don't mind me engineering this a bit, just to talk to people around you, and see whether whether this makes sense, whether you have responses, questions, challenges, whatever it is, and then we can move forward on those. But I think I've said enough. Have I? Is there anything you need clarifying first? Yeah.
There are institutions that give evaluation to make it not in the abstract, but more in the real world. Would government departments ask for evaluation, or is NGOs and lobbyists who want to have a clarification and information about the programs? Because if you do it on an empirical way, you are going to expose problems in the contracts and the delivery and the quality. So shall we aim till each program succeeds or fails, or we can do it at every stage as a buffer zone before failure and success?
Right. Excuse my hearing aids are not working well. But if I got what you said, all that faces an evaluator when they go into ideally, an evaluator goes in with no bridle or saddle or jockey or whatever, you know, telling you which direction to move. You know, they go in open-minded, as it were, and everything that faces them is data. Everything. So the program objectives, the program results matrix, whatever it is, the program logic, if you want, it is data. That's all it is. And we have to assume that it's probably not good quality data. Because a program objective is almost certainly a poor descriptor of what's actually happening on the ground. So ideally, we ought to have the confidence to say, and I know this is difficult and probably not realisable, but we ought to have the confidence to say to evaluators, this is the programme, here are some of the materials, but you don't need to read those, just go and look. When I'm starting an evaluation, a 2-year evaluation, I would expect to spend the first 2 or 3 months just orienting myself, really, and trying to learn about what the programme is before I read the programme objectives. I mean, Michael Scriven, one of the first things that was written about evaluation in 1966, Michael Scriven wrote about, I think it was 66, what he called goal-free evaluation. So his argument was, and he still uses the same argument, that as soon as the evaluator has a sense of what the official goals are of a program, they're contaminated. And it's very difficult to free their mind from that bias. So it's best that the evaluator knows nothing about the objectives of the program. So look at the DARE it's a program I frequently refer to, the Drugs Awareness and Resilience education program in the United States, biggest federal program ever funded in education, now international. And up until when I last checked, all the evaluations that were done of this program showed that it failed to some degree or another against its objectives. And each time the evaluators published that, referring to its initial objective, or following the brief that's been given them by the Federal Office of Education, and they showed it to have failed, there is an outcry on the internet from parents and police officers saying, well, you may think it's failed, but look at the relationships it's allowed us to build. Even just police officers going once a week into schools, you know. Look at how much police officers have learned about youth culture. Look at how mothers feel empowered because they can talk to police officers about drugs problems in their community. Now, knowing all that stuff, you can then begin to think about reshaping, focusing the program to make it much more productive. You know. But first, you've got to understand the quality of the program. If we're looking for quality of the program, where does it lie? And the mothers and the police officers and the school superintendents say it lies in relationships. It doesn't lie in psychological nudge theory or cognitive behavioural therapy or some other fantastic algorithm. It lies in relationships. So fine, if you can demonstrate this and exactly how, and the evaluator can come back with rich enough stories about how relationships play out, then the program managers can begin to think about reallocating resources, redesigning roles, looking again at objectives, as in a program I did evaluate over 3 years, and watch the program director change his program objectives each year until they became an accurate descriptor of what the program was. That was his goal. So, did that address what you...
I had a question, yeah. I think in CECAN we've bumped all of your critiques on both the too much and too little. I make a lot of sense to me. I think CECAN has bumped into lots of those critiques and sort of unfound them themselves as we've thought about how do you make evaluation more complexity sensitive, or how do you make evaluation more impactful. We get exactly the same kind of points. One of the most common responses to that when we've done that is people say, oh yeah, we've known this stuff the whole time. We're repeating back the same thing. We know this is kind of good practice, but it never sticks or it never changes. Do you agree that things don't change? And if you do, why don't you think those critiques stick or make a difference to evaluation as it's done?
Yes. Okay. Well, I have a fairly confident answer to this, which is one response, but there will be others. It is that people who commission evaluations have too narrow a view and too easily think, because a lot of the theorists today create this impression, think that issues around program evaluation have simply been resolved. You know, that we develop theory of change understandings. We develop program theory. You know, we now have a good understanding of how to work with results matrices, algorithms and what have you. We've got a good bank of theories to bring to bear on evaluation. There's attribution theory or whatever it would be, or psychological theory. So a lot of these issues have been resolved. Well, they haven't. They just haven't. You know, we seem to have created the impression, and I'm critical of a lot of my colleagues and authors because they go along with. So methodological texts tend not to be based on how do we deal with these issues. You know, how do we move forward in such a way that we'll never know whether the move is the right move. You know, how can we be useful in a world where it's simply too complex to make an accurate decision, or whatever it is, you know what I mean? But that's fine if people think that. The failure is in the evaluation community, which has not been confident enough to challenge the assumptions behind RFPs. You know, the first job of an evaluator is to give a better characterization of the job of evaluator than the RFP. It's to take the RFP and say, all right, that's your first take on what the problem is and how evaluation might address it, but you don't understand, or you don't understand enough. You know, we know enough about programs to know that it's different from this, and we can work with you to redo the specification. Now, in my experience, most sponsors will go along with that, but not enough evaluators are confident enough to do it. So that's my view, that, you know, that's not regarded as one of the core tasks of evaluation, to redefine the RFP, and that's to do with commercialisation. You know. But I think
I just have one more question, if that's okay. You were talking about kind of nearing the end of the austerity project and how that might mean moving from a place now where we're focusing on clients and maybe moving to more of a place where we're focusing on citizens, consumers. I think you kind of addressed it in your answer to that gentleman about, well, actually, where is the quality of the programme, where is the value of the programme? But can you maybe just expand on what you see as the difference between kind of focusing on the end client and focusing on a citizen?
Yes, absolutely. All right, so Nikki Rayner is the Shadow Education Secretary, and she's now beginning to talk about a national education service, much on the same lines as a national health service, you know. Now, there are many ways of thinking what a national health service would look like. One of them is to think of this dreadful demon organisation, Ofsted, and think, you know, there's a vision of what a national service would look like, all based on common objectives, common performance indicators, common outcomes, you know, all the harmonisation, standardisation, etc. The other way of thinking about it is that you provide a resource and a values framework, and within that framework you give people creative freedom. So much like in programme terms, what Ernest House, in another of his meta evaluations, talks about planned variation experiments. So you have a common set of values, and then you fund different ways of realising those values. And then the job of the evaluator is not to see which is the best, you know, but to see where you would look for quality across the range, and say there's something from this, there's a little bit here, what we're learning here is something else, you know, and to be able to theorise across the variation. Now, you can see there are two completely different value sets in defining a national education service. One is about command and control, vertical integration, and the other one is much more horizontal. It's about balancing accountability with local freedom and what's important. So, what I think is, because I'm old enough to have seen this in the past, different cycles in this sort of thing, that command and control is a cyclical thing. It's a fashion. It's lasted a long time, mostly through Tony Blair, who's the master at doing it. But I think it will go. I really do. And I think at the moment, Nikki Rayner's problem is that she's surrounded by advisors who are steeped in the old culture of command and control, and who are not able to think in alternative ways. Now, I think personally, whatever anyone or me thinks about Corbyn, and I've never had that much confidence in the man, but whatever you think about him, one of the reasons he's so reviled and feared is because he's prepared to open things up. You know what I mean? So it's sort of different ways of thinking, and he is concerned about people's rights, not as clients but as consumers. You know what I mean? So I think, so my view is, and I'll come back in a year's time or 2 years' time, that what's going to happen, I think Grenfell is more than Grenfell, I think it's the beginning of something, is that we're going to open up the world to a wider range of possibilities than programmes currently entertain, or that evaluators are prepared to entertain, or commissioners of evaluation. And I think people are going to start saying, this happened in the United States. You know, where did qualitative evaluation come from? People would, and this is documented by Eleanor Chalimsky, if anyone's ever interested in Google. There's loads that she's written about that. She's a very good friend of mine. Where she was head of the evaluation division of the Government Accounting Office in the United States, the Treasury, essentially. And she documents this, that evaluators were coming back in the 1960s, evaluating programs, saying, the answer is 3%, you know, and then the Congressional Committee says, well, 3% of what? But is 3% a lot or a little? Is that 3% of everything? Or 3% of this and nothing of that? Or sort of 60% of this and 0 of that? You know, what does 3% mean? Who believes in 3%? Is that good for some people, bad for others? We don't know. And so they started to commission, this goes back to the early 1970s, they started commissioning evaluation, which was less focused on the productivity of a programme and much more on the quality of a programme. So said, all right, well, to understand the 3%, we need to understand how it is that people are able to respond to change in particular circumstances. So nurses working on a particular ward in a particular kind of hospital, nurses of a certain age with a certain kind of training, have these capabilities in relation to change. Nurses in other situations, in small clinics, younger, whatever it would be, have an entirely different range of possibilities. So we begin to see the warp and web, you know, more of the texture, you know what I mean? Now I think, I suspect we're going to go back to that. Because I think if Jeremy Corbyn does head up an administration, they're going to be much less interested in simple outcomes, in 3%, and much more interested in the mothers and the police officers' stories, because he's after quality. You know.
I'm just wondering if we were to commission evaluations for outcome, how would government commissions, other commissioners manage the diversity of approaches and practice within the evaluation community? We all carry out different emphases in our evaluation practice. And probably many different ideas in the room about what is evaluation practice, what's good evaluation practice.
A bit louder.
Sorry, diversity of ideas in the room about what is good evaluation practice, what's good techniques, how we should do it. If you were commissioning evaluations on the basis of what's an evaluation that tells me this, that, and the other, and for it to have this effect, how do you manage competing approaches?
Yeah.
I don't know anything about that.
No, I understand. Well, what we do, you know, the fact that evaluation has largely been reduced to impact assessment and outcomes measurement is not through the capabilities of evaluators. It's not maximising the capabilities of evaluators. And I know because I've been part of the UK Evaluation Society that Colin's helped head up for years. And you know, in the private conversations you have, evaluation is a much richer, more diverse animal in conversation than it is in its practice or as reflected in reports. So how do you how do you tap into the latent creative quality of evaluators? A, by insisting on independence as the commissioner of evaluation. And I've got a lot to say about that. No matter where you are in an organisation, you can always trade with the hierarchy for more freedom in commissioning evaluations. And you go to the Ministry of Defence and you look at their strategy for commissioning and procurement, and you take that as a model, where you work on the specification, not on how to address the specification. And then you begin to demand of evaluators that they think more creatively about what they're doing. And the capacity is there, it's clearly there. Is it not, Colin? I mean, I'm not talking idealistically.
No, I think it is. I think it's in pockets, though, and I guess I'm interested in a brave new world which would have a stronger role for evaluators. I think you made some good points about the profession and this misunderstanding the expectations of it, trying to get people to rule on things. But of course, there is a long history of process evaluation as well, which actually admits the added value of the consultations, of the working with the mothers, and all of these sorts of things. It's just that they get lost in the boil, perhaps for easy results. And people like to say, you know, is it working or is it not? I suppose I'm trying to get an idea of the future shape of the profession, and how, rather than just being a rather passive spectator to a process whereby we're stuck in a command and control situation and are faced responding to that. And, a lot of people haven't got a clue who an evaluator is, what it is. You ask them what it is as a profession, and they think, well, is it something like accounting, but it doesn't really have any credibility because it's got no letters after it. You know, it's that sort of problem that one has. So I'm just interested in your views about how you could shape the future which would meet your particular interests, which are for a more public value added role for evaluators in particular.
Yes. Well, this is part of the new thinking, isn't it? I mean, evaluation is a function, not a role, or not a professional role, and it could be, and a lot of evaluation associations are trying to create the profession, you know, with standards and competencies, so that you can put a fellow of the evaluation, whatever it is, you know, against your name or something. But of course they don't have the base in universities to allow that, so that will never happen. There is a bureaucracy built up, an international bureaucracy, which is trying to develop a command and control system within the evaluation community itself. You know? And this is called eval partners. Organisations like that, and all of that will fail, you know. But it is a conundrum. I mean, how do you develop a professional practice that is probably one of the most challenging intellectual professional roles you could imagine? How do you professionalise that when there is no university base for it? There are no master's degrees in evaluation to speak of. You know, I mean, there are some carpetbaggers, you know, sort of MOOCs and whatever, you know, and one or two quality programs, but there's no systematic university address on this. Well, how do you develop a profession? You know, professions in recent years, not in history, but in recent years have developed out of the university base, you know. Well, can evaluation associations play that role? Probably not, because they struggle for their own legitimacy. So I think we just have to live with the fact that evaluators are people who come and go, and rely on situations like this and evaluation societies to try and keep the conversation going and to give it integrity, and to somehow, you know, through journals and in-house briefings and what have you, to keep to make the conversation coherent so that it does respond. The community of evaluators does respond in a coherent way. I mean, the UK Evaluation Society is an unusual and a fine example of a forum that brings together commissioners, evaluators and theorists. And that essentially is what's needed. But how do you take a loose organisation like that, with no, as I say, with little of the university base, and how do you say, how do we respond to the end of austerity? You know what I mean? It's a conversation. It's a conversation, and it will no doubt take years, and it will take much longer than politicians want, I think. Sorry, that wasn't a response. Just a bit of yada yada. Yeah.
Could I pick up on a comment, a thought that came from what you said just then? In an ideal world, if you were going to try and commission some university department or other to start training, providing the training that's needed, which department would you choose?
Yeah.
It just occurred to me that it's probably a ludicrous suggestion that ethics courses in philosophy departments are where you start. But if so, why is that ludicrous?
Well, that actually, I refer to Michael Scriven, he's probably the most substantial patriarchal figure in evaluation, but recently he said precisely that evaluation, it's been through many phases, and now it is essentially, evaluation is ethical practice, that's what it is, he said. And all other disciplines should look to evaluation for ethical guidance on action. Actually, so that would be a good place. No, but it needs what universities are very bad at, and what I've struggled with in universities for years, which is cross-disciplinary attention. So you have to have ethicists there, but you also need people who understand policy, but they're too narrow. They're too dominated by political theory, and so you need anthropologists as well. But you also need a psychologist in there, whatever we think of psychology and the sociology, you know what I mean? It's what universities are beginning to think about. I mean, in the last two universities I've worked with, the university has funded me internally to develop interdisciplinary networks of evaluators. So I've had physicists working with pharmacists, working with developmental specialists, working with educators and stuff, and government should do much more of that. And maybe, organisations like CECAN. I mean, you're obviously drawing together interdisciplinary groups, and maybe that should be an explicit focus of your work. So,
my question is...
It's all right, it's question and answer. I mean, I'm only one voice, you know what I mean?
It's a very practical question. I work for a charity that promotes recycling. We get government funding, we get funding from other places as well. And working very much in a performance management framework. It's very much about these are the KPIs, these are the things that matters. And actually, we just want one, we don't want lots, just one KPI. And kind of my world is very completely opposite to what you were describing, and it's kind of more and more pushed that way. Methods are kind of defined, we've got kind of government guidance on how you do this impact evaluation, which I don't always agree with. So how in that very practical sense, where you're going to a funder and you can hardly go to a funder and say, it's all very complex and actually our programme's a bit of an experiment, we don't know if it'll work, but can you give us some money for it anyway? We have to go and say, well, we think this is going to work, we believe this is going to work, we know the world is a complex place, but actually we've got some faith in this. How do you get from that reality of where I live, as an evaluator if you like, to the world that you're describing, which I completely agree with, by the way?
Right. Okay, well, you're not going to get it by going to the senior managers and saying, look, this is a values-driven organisation, why don't we have values-driven programming and evaluation, rather than even one KPI. So that won't wash. So the solution is not my solution, but the solutions I've seen, and I've seen this in the police service, that brought heavily into the kind of evaluation I'm talking about, in fact democratic, is that there was a captain's revolution. So the middle managers, chief inspectors, in fact, who had the clout to negotiate with senior managers and with people on the ground. So they were perfect placed. They were able to demonstrate to senior managers that no matter what they thought, and no matter what the data said, they had problems. And that if they only had the freedom to do it, they would solve the problem. And so they negotiated the political space to commission some demonstration projects, safe, contained, small-scale projects that showed how you could work outside of these algorithms and frameworks and come up with much more useful information. Now this worked in the police service, and it worked for a long time when I was working, to the point where they had a national network of evaluators, they had an evaluation training course, all based around these principles, and teaching case studies, evaluation case studies. And they've done it on the basis of revealing to senior managers what was the nature of the problem that's being faced. So insisting on a two-way exchange of problem issues identification. So the first thing you get from the evaluators. You say, go out, do whatever it is you want, do qualitative studies, interview one person, 100 people, doesn't matter, you do what you want. But come out with what I now produce in all my evaluations at a key stage is an issues framework, which is to say to the manager of an organisation, I'm not giving you recommendations, I'm not giving you an overall report, I'm just giving you a much better characterisation of the issues you face than you already have. And I'm showing each issue, I'm giving you exemplary data just to show you that it really is a problem. And I'm also giving you in another column the kind of resources that you're going to need to address that problem and what the implications are. And then once you get them to buy into the issues framework, you then do evaluation in a much more focused way, addressing it. But it has to be practical and it has to be based on. If everyone who commissioned an evaluation said, look, we'll talk about an evaluation report further down the line, for the time being, just work on helping to specify the problem. Immediately, in a more realistic and a more creative work. Now, if you can create the space politically to accomplish that, then you can commission a demonstration project and you can show the value of that kind of evaluation. You can show the value, for example, in what we dismissively call the stakeholder view. As though stakeholders weren't able to theorise better than us about what our organisations do. You know what I mean? Is that practical?
I get asked you an impossible question because it's really, I think, an answer to some of this stuff, but that's helpful.
I do think there might be some answers there, or some answers coming out from this kind of thinking, this kind of approach to it. I feel from my experience as a commissioner of evaluations that in a way the kind of ecosystem for evaluation as a commissioner almost has an automatic constraint that's going to get straight away, and that's in terms of the scope, as in the programme has to justify the spend that's put in within a certain amount of time, and you're battling for a slice of that overall budget in order to actually answer those questions. And I think there is space within the commissioning of evaluations area for there to be challenges as part of that commissioning process as to whether the right questions are being asked in the first place. The one thing that I would put back to you though is that you said there that one approach might be to come back with a better understanding of the issues that are faced with and the resources that might go into that. I think the time and the money constraints that are on these, what is there that can be done to get closer to a kind of more than just that within that time, because that's what there's a hunger for, and that's where kind of I feel sort of the role of sort of economists and treasury has kind of grown king in Whitehall over this kind of period that we've had up to now, in that the quick assumptions-based simple answer that comes out with a figure is trusted as reliable, whereas a longer scale evaluative approach where you really try to unpack how you've arrived at that can tend to get overwhelmed by that shorter.
Yeah, okay. It may be that there is there is no possibility of a long-term view or a medium-term view. But it may be that we simply have to wait inside an administrative organisation. We have to wait for impatient email messages or Twitters from the political masters saying, "Now I need to know more. Why aren't you coming out with better information?" Which is what will stimulate all this. But it may be that we just have to wait for that to happen, and that might take a while. But you could easily imagine, quite easily, Jeremy Corbyn, if he were to be in charge, his ministers coming out and saying, "Look, I want a really good argument about universal credit. And I don't want you to give me figures, I want to know the real story. Is a 6-week wait tolerable or not? And I want to know, I want some stories. You know what I mean? I mean, that's what politicians, if they're really interested in reconstruction, are going to be interested in. Or saying, simply, I want to know exactly who makes the final decision about how to clad a building. What exactly are the decision-making processes? Who gets consulted and who doesn't? You know what I mean? There's a qualitative. It may be that we have to wait for that to come, but it will come. It will come.
Yeah, the way I pitch it is, so the quick turnaround of something phase and simplistic approach doesn't enable you to redefine the problem. And it's that third bullet point that's up there, the responsiveness, the developmental. What I'm trying to bring out as an evaluator in my position is that that's what can go beyond what the simple answer gives you and helps the programme develop as it goes. Because I think at the end of the day, the questions, the real kind of questions that are being asked is, should we spend more or can we spend less? And if we do, what's the best way of doing that? And that's not really the questions that end up being asked through commissions and through frameworks or performance, KPIs and things like that. They're predetermined. We think we need to hit this many of that in order to show that we've spent well, and that doesn't really work.
No, it doesn't. All right. Well, two things. First of all, commission very small scale. Find political space, like I say. Commission very small scale studies. You'll get as much as a £10,000 evaluation as you will out of a £500,000 evaluation. In fact, possibly more. If you insist that the £10,000 evaluation is thoroughgoing on the ground and is sufficiently qualitative, not to produce mush, but to produce real evaluative information. You know, not saying to people, why are things like this? What did you do? Why did you do this? But saying to people, what would make a difference? What makes life harder? Where should this be going? You know, if you're able to construct a very small scale evaluation around prospective questions rather than retrospective questions, then all you need is one or two demonstrations, and then you need to go through a determined, focused process of using that evaluation, using them in constructive ways, getting colleagues around, getting them to interrogate the evaluation report, getting them to learn from it, and then document the learning, and then you've got a resource to use. I think, I mean, I've seen this work in the past. It needs a receptive audience, you know what I mean? It needs a receptive content, conducive content. But you've got to start somewhere, actually. But I'd say that small-scale studies, the large-scale studies get bogged down in management issues, resourcing issues, political issues. Very, very small scale. And the other thing, of course, is to do what they're doing in New Zealand. I've just come back for 5 years in New Zealand. There was a meeting, I went to a meeting like this with 4 government ministers, including Bill English, now Prime Minister. He was head of the Treasury, saying, we want to invest in social science. We need you because we need much more intelligence around our policy framing. What can we do? How can you help us? What do you do? And then the first response when they gave it over to the floor came from a leading social scientist in New Zealand. Said, you have to understand that often results take 3 years to become clear in our projects. Collapse of Stout Party. If that's the response, then forget it. But that forum is absolutely essential. If it's properly focused, your charity, if you were to get a bunch of your, what hitherto we've understood by the term stakeholders or clients, you know what I mean? But if you get some of your workers on the ground, and some of the people you work with, together with senior managers, and put them in a meeting together, and give the people you work with in communities, give them a KPI. And say, what sense does that make to you? How would you define a KPI? and just get the managers as an audience to listen to that. You know what I mean? I mean, there are things you can do to create a more conducive environment. We went, and this goes back to 1986, we had this enormous commission from the Home Office to change the culture of policing in the UK, would you believe that, or England and Wales, which we did. It was an enormous project. We did it with the backing of chief constables. Now, they're not known to be wild, frizzy-haired, pinko radicals, you know what I mean? But they bought into it. A democratic evaluation that built knowledge from the ground up, that informed the organisation with stories from the ground. Why did they buy into it? Because they had no idea what went on. They relied on their chauffeurs to tell them what the policing was like. You know? Because in the end, you've got a police officer who goes down the street. He can't supervise the police officer, the nurse, the teacher, the doctor. You know what I mean? So there's no. In the end, command and control means when it comes to shaping culture, professional culture. So they bought into this because they wanted to know. You know, and of course, what we revealed to them was enormously important to them. You know, we were able to reveal to them just how the police training system protected police corruption in such a way that chief officers simply have no leverage over it. Now, you can only do that with highly textual, highly storied accounts that eventually you have to work in a disciplined way and analytically, do you know what I mean? But it's got to start with highly textured accounts. Now, you're not going to get a £500,000 programme funded on that basis, but you may get a £10,000 evaluation and demonstrated utility. Working with UKES actually to disseminate and facilitate. You know what I mean? So,
just a challenge of which is you mentioned the kind of professionalisation gap in evaluation, how evaluators can come and go, and the commercialisation of evaluation as well. And then on the other end, there's the need for open tenders to encourage innovation. But the other side of that, as a commission, there's a huge risk for any poor quality evaluation, or to do a £10,000 evaluation, and it's not to provide anything useful because we haven't specified this rich potential. We only have limited currency with our political bosses.
yes.
1-2 bad products, and the evaluation we're going to have a commission for years.
Yeah.
So this is where the very defined terms of reference comes from. Is there an effective way to balance leaving the methods part open to innovation, securing quality that we need, with the right intent documents, suggestions?
Yes. Yes. Ask me to come and review proposals. Well, first of all, there's a reciprocal thing. You know, because while you're thinking, oh, I can't take too much from this, how can I guarantee I'm going to get a decent experiment? You know, which you can't. I mean, the answer's simple. You've got to take a risk. Simple stuff. You can mitigate this, and you mitigate it by working with people like the UK Evaluation Society, or just bringing in some experts to help you talk through RFPs and specification. But the risk is on the other. The more significant risk is on the other side. You know, the risk, the evaluator's risk of producing something that doesn't hit the button and that threatens their next contract. You know what I mean? I mean, the psychology of doing evaluations in a highly commercialised environment is highly constraining. You know, you better, you know, what you've got to do as an evaluator is meet the contract specifications, otherwise you get a bad reputation. You know what I mean? So to relax that, to start with, you'll get better evaluation. But basically, you've got to take a risk, and you can mitigate it in certain ways. But you've got to be able to identify the people who genuinely can think no further than the contract specification, and the people who are raring to go. You know what I mean? And they will tend to be younger, more junior, or people like me who actually are prepared to invest in junior because I don't have the energy anymore to do what I'm talking about. You know, I don't have creative imagination. So I rely on young people. So if you find those, but it requires work. You do need to change the culture of other people. But in the end, you've got to do this. Sorry, the worst way to manage a risk, incidentally, is micromanagement. How's it going? Tell me what. Confidence. Sorry.
Does anyone else want to ask a question? I don't want to take
no,
time, but my kind of world has been mostly policy evaluations, and that's a particularly difficult area when it comes to social policies. But it does strike me that, it does go back to Tony Blair's period in office, so this was one of the better things he did, was to introduce impact assessments, regulatory ones, which are ex ante, in other words, before you put the policy through. It's a shortened version of a long cost-benefit type of analysis, but you've got 4 or 5 options. Okay, let's talk about them in a rigorous way and assess them. And that seems to me infinitely sensible, and I'm amazed in a sense that evaluation really is still often viewed as an ex-post exercise. And of course a program evaluation, where we're talking about looking at 1-2 year programs, even if you did quite a lot of monitoring, it would still be after the event, so it's going to be expensive and questionable whether the results will lead to any change, whereas that sort of approach where you weigh up options beforehand seems to come a lot closer to the sort of concerns that you've been raising.
Yes, and I think for a particular reason, which is if you work off the ex-ante basis, what you do is you're issuing an invitation to people to theorise about stuff, to think about stuff. You're saying before things get fixed, we want to understand what you're trying to do, essentially, and why. Yes. I absolutely agree, and that's what we do.
And that, of course, at its best, is a cross-disciplinary practice. So, you get a range of policymakers, economists, environmentalists, whatever, to really sort of almost have a brainstorm around what are we trying to do here, and what was the purpose of this program, and therefore, what might be the options that we should be exploring.
Yes, absolutely, and the evaluators in that sense are working on it well. I think
it would get evaluators in at the beginning, which is a much more powerful situation than sort of voicing issues or concerns much later in the day when essentially it's all sewn up, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely, and it opens the way to formative evaluation and runs all the risks of the evaluator being co-opted. But it makes the evaluator part of the programme development, actually.
Yes.
Which they should be. The evaluator should be integrated in that sense.
Can you talk a bit more about that? I find that really interesting, that if you're involved in this, being responsive to a programme that's developing and changing, and as an evaluator you're sort of perhaps determining the criteria of judgment as you're going along. There are risks with that you sort of lose that independent status. I just wondered whether that's a problem even. I don't know.
Well, it's cost and benefits, aren't they? And the last person you want a commission to evaluate an IT development program is an IT expert. But there's a natural tendency to it because they know the field. They'll hit the ground running. But they'll only run in a more particular direction. Chances are. So it's how you get it. It's one of the early issues that was really worked over for in many publications. How do you get that mix of intimate understanding with impartiality? Looking at evaluation as the psychological pursuit of detachment. You know, so engagement through detachment. I mean, I really want to honour the uncertainties and diversity of this programme, and I share the values of the programme in opening up all these possibilities. But to do that, I need to maintain some distance. Now that's psychologically and politically enormously difficult to accomplish. If you start out as the internal evaluator, you've got to look for detachment. If you start out as the external evaluator, you've got to look for the attachment. There's a move. But essentially you do it by insisting on the evaluator that they never crystallise their thoughts into a recommendation. That's it. You know, you deny the evaluator the right to make any recommendations whatsoever. Now that's counterfeit. You know, how difficult is that to swallow?
I'm conscious of time.
Yes.
I'm conscious of time. Thank you for
Any
the
questions?
questions. Just even say, can we give Saville a round of applause? Thank you very much.
And buy the book.
Thank you very much.